proved to the establishment that the concentration camp technique, the reversion to the second dimension of fascism, the terrorist phase, but to prove that this terrorism won't work on us, it won't stop our movement.
This is the BGF oath. Weusi Gaidi Jama, that means Black Guerrilla Family. If I should break my stride or falter at my comrade's side, this oath shall kill me. If my words should prove untrue, should I betray the chosen few, this oath shall kill me. Should I submit to greed or lust, should I betray the people's trust, this oath shall kill me. Should I grow lax in discipline, in time of strife refuse my hand, this oath shall kill me. Should I fear any man or be slow to take a stand, this oath shall kill me. Long live the spirit of George Lester Jackson and the guerrillas of Black August, Weusi Gaidi Jama.
Greetings and salutations. It's your host, Gabe Morales, returning for another episode of Black Guerrilla Family Members over the past 6 decades or so. Today we're going to cover the C last names, as in James Carr. Carr was from Compton. He talks about burning down his school at the age of 10 years old. Carr was affiliated with a group called the Wolf Pack in the late 1950s to early 60s. Carr was very much feared, and he is later said to have been a bodyguard for Black Panther leader Huey Newton. It stated that George Jackson first met Carr when they were both youngsters at the Dual Vocational Institute in the late 1950s. At that time, DVI was filling up with juvenile declines who were considered incorrigible youth in the California Youth Authority. This was about the same time that the Mexican Mafia was taking off also, but before there was a BGF, Aryan Brotherhood, or Nuestra Familia prison gang. Still, the blacks stuck together back then, and James Carr describes this in his autobiography called Bad. Carr then united with other black youth under a loose-knit gang on the yard called the Wolf Pack, basically ambushing weaker inmates and taking their property, extorting them for money, and sometimes forcing them to give up sex. It is stated that Carr was actually recruited into the group by the founder, named Lee Mason, aka Lee Bug. Other members were said to have been Harry Thompson, Chuck Greer, Hogjaw, Cadillac, and Little Joe. It is stated that George Jackson ran with the Wolf Pack until his parole in June of 1960. I'll get into more of George Jackson's criminal career when I get to the J episodes. But James Carr and George were reunited when Jackson was busted again and given a 1 year to life sentence. They reunited on the yard at Soledad in 1961. Carr states that the Mexicans affiliated with the M.A. attacked a black convict named Joe Larson and beat him senseless before taking his stuff. According to Carr, a day later, Big Jake Lewis handed Carr a shank so he could defend his rackets on the yard. It stated at that time that Carr launched a preemptive strike on the Mexicans and that a Mexican Mafia soldier named Hank Malo Sanchez died. Although the district attorney considered filing charges against Carr, they decided to drop that case. It should be clear that James Carr was never a member of the Black Guerrilla family, but he was an associate of them as well as the Black Panthers. James Carr was present at Soledad when George Jackson and the Soledad Brothers were gaffled up and transferred to the Adjustment Center at San Quentin for the murder of Corrections Officer John Mills. It is stated that Carr was released around Christmas time, 1971, and his wife gave birth to a baby girl named Gia, named after part of George Jackson's name. Evidently, Carr decided that when he got out, he wanted to do the family thing and no longer be associated with the BGF for Black Panthers. I don't know if Carr ever read anything about Emiliano Zapata, but he made a similar quote stating, "I've been struggling all my life to get beyond the choice of living on my knees or dying on my feet. It's time we lived on our feet." But on the morning of April 6, 1972, Carr was walking in his driveway to his vehicle on his way in search of work in San Jose when the assailants sprayed him with rifle and shotgun fire, striking him at least 6 times. He died slumped over in the driver's side of his car the day before his 29th birthday. Evidently, the gunmen attempted to flee but were caught about a half an hour later in nearby Morgan Hill, and police found the murder weapons in their car. They were later identified as being Los Angeles Black Panther Lamar Lloyd Mims and 24-year-old Richard Rodriguez, one black and one Chicano. My understanding that Rodriguez was a member of the Brown Berets, which is an organization closely patterned after the Black Panthers. Although the motive remains a mystery, it is believed that Huey P. Newton is widely believed responsible for Carr's murder, based on a very tense dispute they had later on. Next, I want to talk a little bit about Kenneth Fati Carr. Some of you may be aware that his big brother was Apprentice Bunchy Carter, leader of the LA chapter of the Black Panthers, who was killed January 17, 1969, by Ron Karenga's United Slaves, which was a rival group to the Panthers. Evidently, this was an argument over who would run the UCLA African American Studies Center. Bunchy Carter and another Black Panther member named John Huggins were heard making derogatory comments about Karenga, and an argument broke out, and a shooting occurred, leaving Huggins and Carter dead. Some later accused Karenga, who made the winter celebration of Kwanzaa famous, as being a government agent. Of course, he disputed that as just jealousy. You can look that up online if you're interested in that conspiracy. Kenneth Fati Carter was a young man when he was accused of killing a Reverend Arthur A. Smith in the late 1970s. I show then after a trial, Carter was convicted and given CDC number B as in Bravo 52119 and was considered a leader almost immediately due to his connections to his brother, and rose up to become Supreme Commander, overseeing the entire BGF. As stated in the introduction and in the second video, where I covered some other parts of the BGF organization, the BGF went through multiple changes over the years, with varying philosophies between criminal and political emphasis. After George Jackson was killed, there basically were two main leaders, Jeffrey Galden, who was with Cambone, and Doc Holliday, who did maintain revolutionary ties to groups like the Sudanese Liberation Army, but also was more into the Black Entrepreneurial Network side, or BEN, as I described earlier. Per former prison gang section chief Brian Perry, Carter initially had some of his brother's Black Panther philosophies, and even put out a new memo considering the new man, new woman. However, there are some who were against this. Later on, Carter and the BGF changed again when they started calling themselves NAR, New African Revolutionary Nationalism, and members were required to learn lessons of this new philosophy, as shown here. And a confiscated copy of the BGF Constitution circa 1986 stated in Article 2, Section 1, that besides the conditions laid out in Article 1, a member will have a minimum of 480 hours of political training from the Constitution, special around point 10 of the party platform, and available material on the New African Revolutionary Nationalism, or NARN. However, eventually, it's my understanding that Carter got involved in drug activities, so became more like Doc Holliday. Nevertheless, Kenneth Fati Carter remained the Supreme Commander for many years, until his release in January of 2023. Aaron Douglas Akili Matumshi Caslin entered CDC in the late 1990s under J number 99402. Was from Inglewood, located just south of Los Angeles. It is my understanding he was housed at CMC in 1999. While he was at CMC, Caslin and another inmate, Tracy Tate, attacked inmate Rodney Warren, who hailed from the BGF stronghold of Oakland, California, but had expressed his desire to leave the organization, and he suffered dearly for it. Tate and Caslin then attacked Warren and attempted to take him out with a 3-inch blade inserted into a toothbrush and reinforced with tape. Warren was distracted by Tate while Caslin attempted to cut his neck, aiming for the jugular vein. When the assault occurred, Caslin allegedly cried out, "I stand firm," which is a BGF war cry. It was covered earlier in this series. And Caslin then later moved to Pelican Bay, where he was housed for many years, until he was kicked out of the SHU and housed at Centinela in the year 2015. I am told that he was very close to the Black Lives Matter movement, and even wrote a message to the youth on behalf of the BGF on January 16th. 2015, along with BGF members Randall Sondai Ellis and Ricky Kadai Matthews. While he was in custody, Castellan wrote a book called Who Am I? A spoken word memoir, and Aisha is currently no longer in custody. There is Mitchell Celestine, who was from Los Angeles. He entered CDC in March of 1978 with B numbers in Bravo 53119. Once again, I want to make it very clear here that I do not have any solid documentation that Celestine was BGF. However, multiple sources state Celestine was at the very least a BGF associate, although he said he did not commit any murders inside or out, and I believe denies ever being BGF. However, as stated in the B episodes, he and Jeffrey Burks, also from Los Angeles, were accused of killing Edward Glenn Brooks out in the yard of Folsom 4A Security Housing Unit in the early 1980s. My understanding is that there was some friction between different factions of the BGF, and that Brooks was stabbed and later died of his injuries. According to the documentation I've read, Celestine said he had nothing to do with it and was playing basketball when the stabbing occurred. I show that Mitchell Celestine is currently housed at the Richard J. Donovan facility in San Diego. There was Rex Chappelle, who had B number 42679. I believe he was out of Santa Clara County, most likely San Jose. I remember this guy from New Folsom Prison in the late 1980s. And I remember him being pretty gruff and angry a lot of times. But I still was able to communicate with him on a limited basis. I showed that he was housed at Tehachapi in 2011, but is currently not in custody. If anybody knows what happened to Rex Chappelle, I'd be interested in knowing. There was William Bill Christmas. Christmas was actually born in Omaha, Nebraska, but moved to Oakland, California as a child in 1953. In 1964, he was convicted of a burglary at a clothing store in San Leandro and was sent to San Quentin, where he was known as being a problem inmate. Thus, often was placed in segregation at the Adjustment Center. Christmas was also known as Tree, who was part of the August 7, 1970 attack generated by Jonathan Jackson, who was 17 years old at the time. On that date, Jonathan drove to the courthouse in a rented yellow van and entered the courtroom wearing a long raincoat and brought 3 guns that were later found to be registered to Angela Davis into the Marin County Hall of Justice, basically their courtroom where several BGF members were standing trial, and also toted a plastic blue briefcase that was allegedly filled with revolutionary books, 2 of which are said to have Angela Davis's handwritten name on the front of them. Allegedly, Jonathan Jackson whipped out the weapons and stated, "All right, gentlemen, this is it. Everybody freeze." Jonathan Jackson then proceeded to hand out the weapons to the convicts standing trial and held court security staff and members of the jury and Superior Court Judge Harold Haley hostage. I'll get into more details of that case when I get to Jonathan Jackson. But as I stated in the intro video, 4 people were killed, including Jonathan Jackson, 2 San Quentin prisoners on trial who were BGF members, James McLean and William Christmas, and Judge Harold Haley was killed. There's John Clutchette, aka Big John from Oakland, who I believe initially had a B number, then came back into custody with C number 23857. He was one of the Soledad Brothers accused of killing C.O. John Mills shortly after 3 black convicts were gunned down by a guard. The other convicts accused with him were George Jackson and Frida Drungo. Clutchette maintained his innocence the entire time he was in custody. I showed that he was housed at Corcoran State Prison in 2011 and Solano in 2015, and was still in custody until June 6, 2018, when he was released from prison after Governor Jerry Brown declined to rescind his release by the California Parole Board. There was Paul Cook, who is from Oakland, California, and it stated that he was first arrested when he was only 9 years old, and that he was very articulate and was the founder of a prison study group named the Self-Advancement Through Education. It was black study groups like this that were popping up all over the California Department of Corrections, including many members of George Jackson's black family, as well as W.L. Nolan's Vanguard. Another individual I forgot to mention was James Bone Johnson, who had another group called the Black United Movement, or BUM, and all these groups helped form the early nucleus of what later became known as the BGF. After George Jackson's death. In March of 1970, Cook paroled from San Quentin and became a fixture at court hearings for black prisoners, and often wore a black turban and cape, which were common religious attire of the black Muslims that he belonged to. But, like a lot of these guys, he eventually met his demise by being shot to death in Oakland, following a dispute with a business partner, said to be Michael Crump, a.k.a. Malik Al-Malik, who was out of Watts and said to be a co-founder of the Farmers Gang, who preceded the Crips and Bloods, and later on became a Black Studies professor at UC Berkeley. Evidently, they both clashed over how to run a halfway house that they both owned. Malik was later found not guilty of Cook's murder on grounds of self-defense, much to the dismay of his widow, who said she watched Malik produce a gun and shoot her husband, Paul Cook, in the chest, then stand over his body and shoot him once in the head. There was Michael Mutawalli Cooperwood, who I understand was a BGF member in the early 1980s, with C number C46411, and according to the CDC, rose up to be a captain in the BGF. And as you can see here, he had a pretty interesting hairstyle. I show that he was housed at Pelican Bay in the 1990s, and when they had the shoe kickouts, was moved to Salinas Valley State Prison in the year 2015. I believe he was released, but then returned to CDC in February of 1995, and was very active in BGF politics. I show he is currently housed at California State Prison in Solano. And lastly today, we have James, a.k.a. Bolo, a.k.a. Mutombe Duguma Crawford, who is a well-known member of the Bounty Hunters out of Nickerson Gardens, and was a United Bloodline member as well as being a BGF member. It is my understanding that he was considered to be an enforcer for the organization and was well known for checking out convicts' paperwork to make sure they were worthy of the cause and not snitches. He was also a fixture for many years at Pelican Bay. And then when the shoe kickouts occurred, I believe he was sent to Calipatria in 2015 and currently resides at California State Prison, Los Angeles, located in Lancaster, just north of LA. And so, that's all I have for the C last names. I hope you enjoyed this episode and have learned some things. Keep those comments coming because I'm learning too. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.
Should I go lax and discipline? In time of strife, refuse my hand, this oath shall kill me. Should I fear any man or be slow to take a stand? This oath shall kill me. Long live the spirit of George Lester Jackson and the guerrillas of Black August, Boy Usi Gaidi Jama.